Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again William Engdahl. William is fast becoming one of our favorite guests here because he does provide a viewpoint that is different. I don't know about you, but I like to hear different ideas. I like variety. I like to think about what's going on and not just accept what I'm told, and therefore I guess that's one of the reasons that I like to talk to William Engdahl. His views and actually, his books that he has written is first how I learned to know about him. The Gods of Money, one of the ones that I've read and have really learned to enjoy. I think it's really very valuable for Americans to read it in terms of our own history, having an understanding of our own history. You know, all the countries have their own history books, and they interpret history in a way that satisfies the status quo. Sometimes it's good to get other viewpoints to find out what the truth is as opposed to what you're supposed to believe is true. So we're very thankful that William has joined us again. Thank you for being with me again.
Glad to be with you, Jay.
Always good to talk to you, even though we're miles and miles apart. You're in Germany, but it sounds like you're next door. I understand you just recently returned from Russia, where you witnessed in person an interview with Vladimir Putin and CNN anchor Fareed Zakaria. What can you tell us about that event? What was that event, and what can you tell us about the dialogue between Mr. Putin and the CNN anchor?
Sure. The event was the 20th anniversary of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. There were more than 12,000 attendees, businessmen from all over the world, I forget how many countries, and political people such as the Prime Minister of Italy, the President of the EU Commission, Juncker, the heads of many different countries. It was just a fascinating collection of world businessmen. Russia is by no means, at least on that front, suffering from isolation. People want to do business with Russia. And that apparently happened in many cases. The Fareed Zakaria, every year apparently, it's my second year being invited there to be a panelist, and last year it was similar. It was Charlie Rose. There's a plenum session with all the paid guests invited, and I had the good fortune through various means to sit right on the front row, so I could just be yards away from Putin and Zakaria. And they're sitting in these lounge chairs, like on many interview shows, and Zakaria throws questions at Putin. And they're CNN questions, they're hostile questions. And Putin fields the question with no teleprompter. I can tell you this because I was right there. I could see there's no teleprompter. He does it spontaneously, which is very impressive. And the answers he gives are, I cannot imagine an American president going into the kind of depth that he does in his answers. There were two questions that stand out in my mind. One was when Zakaria quoted from a piece of paper that Putin had referred once to Donald Trump as brilliant, creative, and some other very positive adjective. And you still hold those views today. And Putin turned to Zakaria and said, Mr. Zakaria, you're a very well-known journalist and scholar in my country. And the question you just posed was of the worst type of journalistic word twisting, where you took my words and turned them into something completely different. I never said Donald Trump was brilliant. I said he was bright, but the word bright in English translates from colorful. The translation was sloppy apparently. But he said, I never made those kinds of comments. Mr. Trump said if he were president, he would work with Russia to better our relations. Who should be against that? Are you against that, Mr. Zakaria? And so he said, I'm like this. And Zakaria just couldn't say anything. And the second one was the banning from the Olympics because of doping. And trying to tweak Putin again on this very hot political issue. And Putin said, listen, I'm an amateur sportsman most of my life, and no serious sportsman likes it when somebody cheats at World Championship. It takes the value out of the effort to do the humanly best possible. Russia does not condone doping in any way, shape, or form. We don't know what happened to those doping samples that we and every other country submitted because we weren't allowed to analyze them ourselves in our labs. They were taken immediately to someplace in Lausanne, Switzerland.
Wow.
And then about the hooliganism, he said, you tell me that Russians are responsible for the soccer game fights in France last week, where 200 Russian fans are surrounded by several thousand British soccer fans. I don't believe that's an accurate representation. And just one thing after the other. So from the serious to the whatever, it was just fascinating to watch his mind in action. And would that we had presidents of half the intellectual depth or chancellors in Germany and elsewhere. The world, I think, would be a little bit safer place.
Well, we're told all the time, of course, that it's Russia and China, it's these countries that are threatening us. We hear all the time in the United States that the Russian economy is on the ropes. We hear that the Chinese economy is in big trouble, and I must say that I kind of buy into that one. The Chinese economy, I don't know that they're in worse shape than we are. I mean, I think that on the other hand, the spin in the United States is that things are much better than they really are, for sure. Yeah. But you wrote an article on May 25th. You wrote an article, China and Russia is where it's happening. So, from the propaganda we get in and day out, but you were talking in pretty glowing terms in some ways about the Russian and Chinese economies, or at least their cooperation between themselves in developing and building wealth. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I just finished a book on this for China. It's called the Eurasian century, in contrast to the American century, which is in its twilight now in the last 25, 30 years. The Chinese president 2.5, 3 years ago in Kazakhstan proposed building a new economic Silk Road, is what they call it. Now it's called the One Belt, One Road. It's a series of deep-sea shipping ports in Malaysia and Pakistan and many different countries in surrounding Eurasia, and a network of high-speed railway links that will crisscross Eurasia from Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, down into Iran now, the latest leg of the thing, and up through into China and Pakistan and all sorts of places in between. And the Chinese have created co-created two international lending banks. One is the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which started up late last year, and the other is the BRICS. That's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa countries. The BRICS New Development Bank. And those were created explicitly to lend to infrastructure projects in Eurasia, in Asia. Because the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are U.S.-controlled institutions. They're not interested in development. They're interested in controlling development in those countries with their credits and their conditionalities. Mm-hmm. So it's very little covered in the West. It's astonishingly little covered in the European Union, where I live in Germany. But this is probably the biggest infrastructure project, building railway lines and ports and so forth, in world history, but beyond a doubt. It's going to transform the economic map of this planet, unless we are stupid enough to blow ourselves up in a thermonuclear orgy of so-called ballistic missile defense and all this other nonsense that Obama's administration is throwing at Russia and China. I don't think that will happen, frankly. I think the world has more sanity than that, and whatever the neocons that have hijacked the State Department and a chunk of the Pentagon and the CIA in the last years, whatever their agenda is failing everywhere. All their wars are losing wars. They never win wars. You have to think about that. Iraq, 2003, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney. They lost that war. Afghanistan, they lost that war. Libya, they lost that war against Gaddafi, Hillary Clinton's war. And you just go on down the list. The Arab Spring, that was U.S. State Department, that was Hillary Clinton. And they lost all of those wars. Egypt, they put in a puppet Muslim Brotherhood president called Mohammed Morsi. Muslim Brotherhood is a fanatical death cult. The mother seed crystal of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS, of Al-Nusra, all of these terrorist organizations. They're death cults. So they've lost all of this. They are losing it. And that's what's got them freaked out, I think. It's got look at Hillary Clinton's face when she makes a speech about any of these subjects. She just spews out hate and venom. And that's not what the world needs right now. It's not what the United States need. It's not what American people need. We need someone with a balanced mind, a mentally stable, balanced mind, and a mind that's inclined toward peaceful diplomatic solutions to these conflicts and not war every time that the U.S. always loses, by the way.
Yeah. Well, maybe by design, you create chaos, and then a vacuum takes place, and then you gain control. I mean, the more chaos you create.
And when I say they lose, Jay, they never finish that point. They don't gain control. Yeah. China comes in, Russia comes in. They stabilize the situation as best they can, but the U.S. never gains control. These Wall Street banks never gain control. Big oil never gains control. They lose everything every time, and they cannot see that.
Well, as you say, we need
a important point. Excuse me for really stressing that.
Sure.
It's very crucial.
Yeah, you say we need a president in the United States who seeks peace, who seeks peaceful resolutions and ways to work together and to make the world a better place. We've got a choice now between Clinton and Trump. I mean, what hope do you have? And now we're hearing the story about how the U.S. or the NATO is putting troops around Russia in many ways, and there's talk also about how trying to find an excuse almost to ramp up the anger towards Russia and possibly engage in a military conflict with Russia. They're talking about how NATO is talking about how they're blaming Russia for tapping into Hillary's emails, and that could constitute a provocation of war. I mean, that's
Hillary's emails are public documents. They're not classified State Department documents. That's the point.
That's the point. But the point is, they're saying that whether it's Russia or whoever it is, they're blaming Russia for tapping in and making it so some excuse. I mean, it doesn't have to be a truthful reason, right? I mean, wars in the past, there's a lot of times provoked by false flags.
Sure. The Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam, all of those.
All of those, right? Exactly. So, I mean,
Spanish-American War.
So, can you say? I mean, to me, I'm concerned about it. I mean, here we got NATO putting the German soldiers are operating in Lithuania. British is over in Estonia. The U.S. soldiers are moving in to protect Latvia. Canadians will be in Poland, supposedly. Also in the Mediterranean, combat units are being increased, supposedly, now as we talk. This doesn't sound like the NATO people are going away. I like the neocons that Eisenhower warned us about are going away. Where's your reason for hope?
Well, this letter from 51 leading lights, if you want to call them that, of the U.S. State Department, saying we need to, in order to create stability in Syria, we need to bomb the Syrian National Army and Hafez al-Assad. And any idiot with half a brain can follow the logic that would open the door for chaos and ISIS or Al-Qaeda al-Nusra to simply walk into Baghdad. And what was that? Another Libya, another failed war.
But isn't that what you might expect from Hillary?
Of course.
Yeah.
She's mentally unstable. Excuse me for being very blunt about this. The woman is not competent to be a Sunday school teacher, let alone.
But I think the last time we spoke, you were more concerned about Donald Trump than her. So where does that leave us?
Between evil one and evil two, there is no lesser of two this time.
So where's the room for optimism, William? I'm grasping for it.
The room for optimism is outside the U.S., I think, and if people in the U.S. wake up from their trance and realize that this is all Hollywood staging, it could even be that Donald Trump was put in there to throw the election to Hillary Clinton. I don't know. It could be that Hillary Clinton has a stroke and drops dead, or that she's indicted for these email scandals that Obama is so desperately trying to prevent, because there's some kind of dirty deal between Obama and Bill Clinton to hide certain Obama scandals, as far as I can see. Mm-hmm. Very dirty deal. So it's a mess. Washington is like Rome in the 4th century A.D. It's the stench of corruption is everywhere. The lack of principled senators. I was at a conference 3 years ago in Tehran with a former senator from Alaska, and the demeanor, the statesmanship, the intellectual quality of this person was heads and shoulders above someone like, just name any senator you want, or congressman. And, he was concerned for his nation. He said, we Democrats and Republicans, always behind the scenes, used to find room for compromise and not this confrontation, shutting the government down for weeks at a time, or doing this or doing that.
All right. Well, you mentioned your hope lies with Europe, and I take note.
No, I didn't. I said Eurasia.
Oh, with Eurasia. Okay, but
Europe is a disaster right now.
Oh, okay. Well, we're seeing a lot of discontent in Europe. I mean, you can understand. I believe the French Total has an interest in this gigantic LNG project that's in Russia. You're seeing the French people, some of the German people actually getting really angry about this provocation of war from NATO, and suggesting that Russia tapping into Hillary's emails warrants war and stuff. And the Europeans themselves, there must be a lot of people. You're in Germany. Do you sense that there is an uprising and anger among the German people against this sort of one world government movement that the NATO seems to want to push?
Well, there's a huge uprising. Germans, a friend of mine told me of a German airline pilot who made an informal survey of everyone he met, maybe 200 people on the street, and so said, how do you feel about staying in Europe or leaving it, given the present situation? And he said 98% said, let's leave it. Let's leave it. This is a failure. It's a disaster. Angela Merkel, the refugee policies that she's following, the everything that's coming out of Berlin these days is just freaking out the ordinary German who wants nothing but stability. Unusually so because of the history of Germany, the Second World War, the post-war traumas and rebuilding of the nation back in the late 40s and the 50s. So they want stability. They don't want, refugees coming in where every third one may be a terrorist. They don't know. Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. Suddenly there's a million of these people walking around with different dress, and some of them walking around like hip-hoppers. Most of them male, between 18 and 26, by the way. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And talk about a formula for social explosion. When the Syrians go out en masse on the streets in big cities like Berlin or whatever, and then the Turkish gangs do the same, and they've been here a little bit longer, they know the language, but you have turf wars and all sorts of things. So this is just destabilizing ordinary Germans like nothing in the post-war period, because it's not refugees from the Soviet system in Eastern Europe or East Germany that are streaming over, who speak the language, who share the culture of Europe and so forth. These are people from a radically different culture. Most of them, I think 83% I read, most of them completely uneducated. So this idea of a skilled labor pool of doctors and lawyers and scientists and engineers is a complete myth. That's how Merkel sold this thing, and it's a complete myth. So it's the person steering this, both in Syria and in Germany, is the American. I won't call him philanthropist because he has no love of mankind, George Soros.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. I think Zero Hedge, I was reading something about Soros has actually come right out and said and admitted essentially that he is in the process of, or that he engages in overthrowing governments through his NGOs. So, I mean, that's something that you have talked about. Daniel McAdams, the Ron Paul Institute, has talked about it. It's fairly well known, but that that he is really the government in a sense, or these rich, powerful people. We had John Perkins on this show, and we've only got another minute or so left. But John Perkins talked about how the United States, since World War II, what it's tried to do is get third world countries in debt, and it tries to get the dictators to go along with the program. If they don't, they arrange an accident, his airplane goes down or whatever. They put in someone else. If they can't get the government to agree with the indebtedness program to get the country in debt, then in some cases we'll send in the military. Do you think you think Soros has been operating with a color revolution attempts in Russia, perhaps?
George Soros has been involved in every single color revolution since Tiananmen Square in 1989 in China, when the Chinese government threw his foundation out of the country. George Soros has been involved in stirring up dissidents in Russia. He's been involved, and he bragged about this, in the Maidan Square coup d'etat that the U.S. pulled off in February 2014. He bragged that he has been involved in Ukraine since before, when it was still part of the Soviet Union, through his NGO. All
right, William, we're going to have to let it go at that. We're really out of time. I'm really sorry. We could go on and on with you. Thank you so much for being with us. And
thank you, Jay.
And your book, of course, people should go where to you mentioned your website.
Yeah, my newest book is called The Lost Hegemon, Whom the Gods Would Destroy. And if you go on my website, you can subscribe for free to my bi-monthly newsletter, bi-weekly newsletter.
Absolutely.
You'll get excerpts from an entire chapter from the book so you can get an idea.
Right.
But it's explosive, the Lost Hegemon.
Yes, it's a must-read, folks. Please go out and buy it, and we'll look to talk to you again sometime in the near future. William, thanks so much for being with us.